What's the most awkward situation you've ever been in? I was looking at my mom's phone cause she wanted to show me some pictures from what she did that weekend. I swiped one too many times and came across one of her ends. I felt my soul jolt out of my body seeing that. I was in some business college class and the professor was talking about something related to how celebrities brand themselves. Someone in the class brought up Shaun White as someone who had great celebrity branding but isn't really talked about a lot. The professor was Indian and said he wasn't familiar with who that was. So my genius ass thought it would be perfect to say out loud I'm talking about Mountain Dew's baby. As a joke reference to that newscast where Shaun White said he had been drinking all night but was underage and the news person asked him what he meant so he responded with I'm talking about Mountain Dew's baby. And no one seemed to know about that or at least didn't think it was funny as silence rang through the classroom and professor awkwardly moved on to a new topic. Truly the most awkward situation I've been in and also the worst haunting moment of my life. My 79-year-old mother-in-law with Alzheimer's telling us that she did it the previous night with another resident of her nursing home. She had been celibate for 20 years up until then. We think. Boss of mine worked in a retirement home. Apparently, they have a huge STD problem in those homes because why wear protection when your ovaries don't work? The bright side is if you're a virgin all you have to do is wait till you're old and decrepit, get put in a home, buy tons of Viagra, and get your game on. I don't know if this is really the most awkward, but it was def awkward. I visited my bio dad's old church in Mississippi a few years ago and spoke to his old preacher for a moment. One important detail for this story is that my dad died when I was 7, so a pretty good while back. My grandma told the preacher who I was this is Pamela Sr.'s daughter, Pamelo. Preacher oh. Pamelo SR. Tell him I said hi for me. Me sure thing. My grandma's face was priceless. We agreed the preacher would feel really awkward when he remembered later that my dad was dead. When I was a kid, we were on holiday and decided to go to a church. While we were there I decided that I would be funny if I would slap my dad's ass with both hands. So I ran in full speed to maximize the impact of the slap. I ended up slapping a stranger who also happened to walk next to a woman with a stroller in his hands which made me think it was my dad. It was even worse that my parents saw it as well. Edit because people are asking what happened afterwards. My parents just laughed at me, which made the guy laugh as well and then we just left the church I think. So are you two dating? He said yes at the same time I said no, to which his friend told him I told you you didn't ask clearly enough. I accidentally mixed up him saying yes and me saying no. Reminds me of the time I was driving a girl back from a date when we got in a car wreck. Rolled the car and everything. Dragged her out through the window as she's bawling. When we were talking to the cop he asked us how long we'd been together. She said we were just friends. Not that I didn't have it coming. I was at a funeral for one of my husband's relatives. On my way in, an employee of the funeral home asked me when I was due. I wasn't pregnant, but I am fat and was wearing an Empire waistcoat so I wasn't offended. As I signed the guest book I corrected her and tried to defuse the situation with a joke about burning that coat later. But she just wouldn't stop. She kept trying to apologize and explain herself and I just wanted to run away. Then I was stuck in a small room with her for the next 2 hours. Not awkward for me, but I was the reason for it. I served for a couple years and worked multiple restaurants in that time frame. I worked at a Denny's, night shift, best and worst job for many reasons. Anyways there was a regular that came in often, drunk as a skunk and nasty as hell. He tipped really well but was so nasty to us girls. It never fazed me so I served him often. He offered many times to pay for extra service and tried to get me to leave with him often. Of course I never did but a couple months later I'm working a new place little more high-end. I worked mornings here, and this was a Sunday morning church rush. Guess who was sat in my section? My nasty regular from my last job with his entire family. His wife, kids, parents, the whole group, fresh out of church. The look on this man's face when I walked up and said hello. He was red as a fire truck, and I made it worse by asking if he remembered me. He left me a huge tip, Probably because I didn't bring up his nasty mouth and grabby hands from his late drunken nights. Edit: I was a waitress, that's what I meant by serving. I was a teenager with a bone. Pretty standard so far. I walked downstairs and had to tuck it in my pajamas so the head is sticking straight up and the erection is pinned against the body so the bone isn't noticeable. Well, when I put my t-shirt on it fell behind the tip, so if you looked at my wasset line you could clearly see the tip of my pen. I was talking to my mom for a few minutes and she was flushed red in the face and quickly trying to kill conversation, not something my mom is known for. I walked away, saw what was going on and didn't know what the hell to do. We never discussed it, but because things were so awkward at dinner, I'm pretty sure my mom knew that I realized it happened as well. Was unexpectedly in the car ride with my boyfriend's parents on their way to sign their divorce papers. This poor girl walked into my lecture by mistake about halfway through. This particular professor really enjoys talking to all of his students and was super engaging even with 400 students in his class. When the girl walked in, my professor stopped teaching, looked at the girl and asked if she was in the class. She said she was and began walking towards the front where the open seats were. This is a fairly large lecture hall and all 200 students, approx how many actually show up to class, were now forced to watch this poor girl walk towards a seat because the professor didn't continue talking and just stared at her. She got close to the front and I think the pressure of the whole room got to her and she said, "Actually no, I'm not," and turned around and we all had to watch this poor girl climb back up the stairs and out of the hall. I was literally watching my worst nightmare. I have a regular breakfast place that I had been frequenting on the weekends for about a good 5 to 6 years. One day I went into work later because of a doctor's appointment, so I decided to pick up some breakfast at my regular place. I walk in and I take a look around to find a spot to sit at and I see my dad. Hess sitting in a corner spot with some woman I don't recognize. He looked shocked and I decide to walk over. He stands up and gives me a kiss/hug and introduces her as a co-worker. It was the most awkward introduction of my life. My dad was an AC repairman and was strictly on the road. No women in his office. I pretended like I believed him, said hello and sat down on my own. Definitely one of the most awkward moments of my life that will stand out for a long time. More background: my mom and dad haven't been together since before I was born, however he was married to another woman when this took place. The waitresses were all my friends and a couple days later when I went for breakfast they proceeded to tell me how he met that lady there every week. I never brought it up to him and pretended it never happened. That was about 14 years ago. I still go to that breakfast place and the girls told me after that day he never came back to that restaurant. In a couple of weeks it will be 1 year since he passed. I'm glad I got this opportunity to think and talk about him. When I was a kid I hugged a random dude because I thought it was my dad. Even better how this dude's son was standing next to him. You established yourself as his new son. One time in college, I snuck into my RA's room and hid under the blanket on his top bunk. My goal was to scare him when he came in and settled down a bit. He ended up coming in with his girlfriend and began making out with her. After a good lifetime couple moments, I jumped up and ran out. No saving it. Gilded platinum? Thank you so much, internet friends. I've said it to a few of you, but it makes me legit happy that you have gotten a laugh and a smile out of my awkward story. When I was a kid my family's van broke down, so we all had to squeeze into my dad's car to go to a funeral. Anyways, my older sister had to sit on my lap. Yep, you guessed it. I got a boner and she freaked out and started screaming. I would just cut all contact with everyone and go live in the forest for the rest of my life. One time when I was like 12 to 13 I was hanging out with some friends at a fast food joint in town. This town had a place that housed and employed mentally challenged individuals, so those individuals would often come to the restaurant for lunch. On this particular day, a group of them was arriving just as we were leaving. One of the guys walked up to us and said, "Hey, do you want to see my winu?" and whipped it right out. Broad daylight, right there. We were stunned, and then super embarrassed, being immature 12 to 13-year-olds and all. His caretaker was mortified, but great. He immediately took control of the situation, reprimanded the individual, apologized profusely to us, made the individual apologize, etc. So yeah, that's right up there as far as awkward situations go. My family's not super religious, but when I was about 13, they decided to go to synagogue on Purim for some reason. Part of Purim involves reading from the book of Esther, which has a part about Esther coming to see the king while he's sitting on his throne in the throne room, and when he sees her, he stands up and extends the golden scepter. When the rabbi got to that part, my 13-year-old brain pictured Esther coming to see the king while he's sitting on the shitter and burst out laughing. No one else laughed. Instead, everyone turned to stare at me, and I had to explain myself to an entire room of people. We now celebrate Purim in the comfort of my parents' home. Okay, I already posted in this thread, but I remembered something even worse. When I was in 2nd grade, my brother and I would always be picked up after school by my dad. We had a green van with a red stripe on the side. So my brother grabs my hand and storms us up to the car. He rips open the door, sits us down, buckles me in, and then says, "Can we get McDonald's on the way home?" We both look up, and there is 2 middle-aged adults sitting in the front seat that are obviously not our family. They stare at us, we stare at them. In my little brain, we've been staring at each other for at least 10 minutes at this point. My brother unbuckles me, unbuckles himself, we get out and walk away. No words were exchanged. We then checked who was in the car before getting in from that point forward. I was riding in the passenger seat with my mom, who has always been strict and very tight-knit, several years ago, when for some reason she decided to completely open up to me about all of her drug experimentation and sexual exploits in the 60s, and the time she did cocaine with Steve Jobs at a fancy restaurant in the 80s. It was a very uncomfortable eye-opener, and I was trapped listening to it. I used to run a restaurant and had inherited an employee with a slew of mental health issues. She had massive anxiety issues and just couldn't handle the pressure of working in a restaurant. She'd break down and cry over simple mistakes if she felt she was making too many. It was extremely unfortunate, but I was terribly underprepared to coach someone like that. One day, during downtime, the cooks were shooting the shit and recounting stories of weird ex-co-workers. I opened up my yap and said, "Who was the one who kept crying every time they'd screw up?" She was 2 feet away and literally responded with me. I was in the car with my girlfriend's best friend's moms and her other daughter. We made talk in the car, and I just ended up asking what their favorite color was. They then told me the other daughter was actually blind. I had barely known these people and was in the car for another 20 minutes, most awkward 20 of my life. When I was rushing my fraternity, there was an upperclassman who was literally walks with a stick blind. One night we're all sitting around and he had misplaced his beverage. He asked if I knew which cup was his, and I asked him, "Is it the blue one or the gray one?"